One of the interesting things about being human is the way we have to make so many choices. This morning, for instance, you've been making choices. You chose to be here for a start. You chose to wear whatever you're wearing. You chose to sit wherever you're sitting. And on through the day, there'll be many more choices that you'll make. And then there are the really important choices that we make. What to believe, how to behave, where to live, what to do for a living, who to settle down with, whether or not to have a family. Our choices matter because they shape who we are and how our journey through life will take form. Being a Christian person doesn't mean that we give up making choices, sort of going limp and handing everything over to God. It's not like that at all. Being Christian means we're called into a life of discipleship, learning to love, to heal, to encourage goodness, to challenge evil, to ask for forgiveness and to offer forgiveness. In so many different ways, we're called to imitate Christ and to make choices that resemble the choices Jesus made. Our choices as Christian people do matter. But sometimes we can go a bit too far, and we can end up fooling ourselves that not only our earthly well-being, but also our eternal destiny depends entirely on our own ability to make good choices. If I choose to work hard, if I choose to pray regularly and read the Bible, give generously, support worthy causes, and honestly try to understand myself and grow as a person, if I choose to follow Jesus day by day, then God will love me and everything will be all right. Now the problem there is it puts me right at the center of everything. Everything ends up depending on me and the choices that I make. Nothing's left for God. There's no room for God to take the initiative, no chance of surprise. One of the writers I looked at on this passage says this: if this happens, what we may have lost is a full sense of the power of God to recruit people who've made terrible choices. The power of God to invade the most messed up lives and fill them with light. The power of God to sneak up on people who are thinking not about God, but about lunch, and to smack them on the side of the head with glory. That's the sort of thing that's going on in our gospel passage this morning. Bring it into your imagination. The Sea of Galilee, boats hauled up on the sandy shoreline, the unmistakable smell of fish, some fishermen mending their nets, others dropping them out. Along comes Jesus. He calls out to Simon and his brother Andrew, and immediately they leave their nets and follow him. Then a little way down the beach, the same call, and James and John leave their father Zebedee in the boat with some hired workers, and they go off and follow Jesus. How's that for making really significant, life-changing choices? Could we do anything like that? If I sensed God calling me to begin some adventure, could I get up and walk out the door and leave everything behind and trust myself to following the call? Could you? That's pretty much what those 4 disciples did. And when we think of them, don't we tend to give them the credit? What strength, we say, what courage, what faith they must have had to get up and do that. What a risk, what a sacrifice, what heroes they are. But that's not how Mark tells it in his gospel at all. According to Mark, those fishermen, well, they weren't particularly religious. He doesn't say that they've just come from the synagogue or anything like that. They didn't expect Jesus to come by. They weren't waiting for him. They hadn't been thinking about the possibility of his invitation. They'd made no preparations. Yet it seems they took one look at Jesus, and that was enough. There was no anxious soul searching or counting up the cost or weighing the options. They just dropped what they were doing and followed. So this isn't just about 4 heroes of the faith making a bold decision. It's more about something happening to them, something that they couldn't entirely control themselves, something that drew them into the choice they were going to make. If you like, this is a miracle story. It's a story about the power of God to work a miracle in the lives of ordinary people by kindling trust where there was none to mention before, and by creating disciples where before there were fishermen just getting on with their lives. Think of it, if you like, as something like falling in love. We don't choose to fall in love, it just happens. And then we have to start making some choices. Jesus showed up. Andrew, Peter, James and John were drawn to him. The rest is history. Yes, it was a life-changing moment. It cost them a lot. But in that moment, they weren't focused on what they were leaving behind. They were already looking to the adventure ahead of them. Joseph Campbell, the famous expert on myths and culture, he would have said that those 4 fishermen had found their bliss. They had found what it was that was their vocation in life, if you like. And they were given up to following their bliss. And in that God-drenched moment, the miracle occurred, and their lives flowed in the same direction as God's life. Now, millions of Christians around the world will hear this gospel story this morning. And I have a hunch that too often when we think about the calling of those first disciples, we take too narrow a focus on it. As well as thinking it's all about choosing to follow Jesus, we can think it's always about leaving everything behind, making huge sacrifices. Well, that's what it meant for Andrew, Simon, James and John, leaving everything behind. And over the centuries, there have been Christians who've done a lot of leaving behind to follow Jesus. But the call to discipleship, the call to follow Jesus, works out in different ways for different people. I like the way Barbara Brown Taylor plays with the idea, using images from the shores of Galilee. Simon, Andrew, James and John dropped their nets and followed Jesus. But sometimes, for some people, discipleship, following Jesus, may mean staying where you are. Sometimes following might mean something like letting the hired servants go and taking on yourself the responsibility to look after old Zebedee when he can't fish anymore. Sometimes responding to the call to discipleship might mean casting the same old nets but in a new way or for new reasons. Following Jesus might mean doing something different with the fish that you catch, or spending the money that they bring at market in a different way. It might mean working to reorganize the whole fishing business so that even the drifters down at the jetty will have work to do and everyone gets a decent living wage. Following Jesus might even mean doing less every day, not more, so that there's time to watch the light changing on the water and how the fish leap out of it at dusk, happy to have outsmarted you one more time. The possibilities of responding to call and to follow Jesus are endless. Sometimes, yes, spectacular and attention-getting. Sometimes, perhaps more often than not, quietly, without any fuss, and hardly noticed by people around us. But whenever, however, every time we find whatever it is that brings us alive and gives us a sense of fulfillment, every time we hear the call of Christ and go with the flow of God who wants the best for us, it's like God is drawing us out, inviting us to respond, calling us into a miracle, and the dominion of God has drawn near. Amen.